Today we're going to be talking about surf fishing, and in episode 1 we talked about rod and reel options, and today we're going to be talking about rigs and techniques and talking about all the various techniques that work in the Southern California surf and can catch a variety of species of fish. I'm joined by Jake from Fisherman's Access in Brea. Thank you so much again for having us and letting us film here. Support your local shop, come on in. Jake is super kind, extremely knowledgeable. He's gonna help you out with everything that you need. So Jake, thanks so much for having us. And Anthony, as always, it's an honor to share this time with you as you share your knowledge. Let's start off actually with the Carolina rig. I'm gonna actually hand it over to Jake. And Jake, if you can talk about like basic Carolina rig. I pulled some stuff here. I don't even know if this is what you would use. Yeah. We'll just kind of bounce off and see how this time goes.
Yeah, so I mean, the Carolina rig is probably your hands down best way to just catch fish in general in the surf. It's extremely easy to use, extremely easy to set up, and it's just plain work. So what you're gonna do with the Carolina rig is you're just gonna take a single hook, different sizes, all the way from 2 to 8. Because you're gonna fish a various amount of baits too, anything from live bait, you can fish ghost shrimp, you can fish cut squid, you can fish a plastic worm, you could do the gulp little sandworms. There's so many different ways to do it, and the fish, I mean, they respond to it pretty well. So here in Southern California, we're fishing anywhere from usually 1/4 to 3/4 of an ounce. Like Benji said in a recent video, I mean, once you get over 3/4 of an ounce, I mean, it usually gets a little hairy out there, a little dicey. It's usually not the best. And when you rig this up, I mean, it's a relatively simple rig to do. I mean, you're just gonna take your single hook, whatever hook you like. You're gonna throw your weight onto your main line. You're gonna put a bead behind it, tie it to a swivel, and off of your swivel, you're gonna have your leader. Anywhere from, depending on what you're doing in the surf, all the way down the light line 4-pound stuff, all the way to 10, 12 pound. Put a leader on, put your bait on, free flows around there pretty good. Leave it out there, reel and real slow. Just make sure you keep a little bit of contact with the bait, and it just flat works. One of the best ways to fish out there. I mean, that's...
Definitely, Jake is spot on. If you're just starting out in the surf, the Carolina rig would probably be the one that we would recommend that you start off on. And again, I'm the one that actually pulled these hooks. For the Carolina rig, 2 might be a little bit big depending on the profile that you're going for, but anywhere from 4 to 8, depending on your gear, is probably gonna work. Little grubs, big hammer grub, any 2-inch, 2.5-inch grub. And then the gulp camo worms, which we affectionately call crack.
Perch crack, yep.
They work.
And then sand crabs is actually, very plentiful in the summertime. So many different options. I actually just made a full breakdown beginner tutorial for the Carolina rig. So I'll link that in the video description. You can check out exactly how I tie the knots and all the terminal tackle broken down. But it's something that we should talk about when we talk about surf fishing.
One of the other things I'm a big fan of, there's a couple different styles of line through weights. You have your traditional just egg weight, it's line through. We see those in every single tackle store. There's another style of weight out there that I've been a big fan of using. It's the bullet weights. Any bass shop, any shop really should have these, but especially your local bass stores, they use them a lot for Texas rigging. It's a cone-shaped lead head, so a lot of you guys have worked with me in the past and you know that I'm a huge fan of this. What happens with that cone is as you're winding in, it creates a slight upward angle. So in the surf, there's a lot of little micro ridges, and if you're sitting there slow winding in a Carolina rig, your rod's just gonna be bouncing and you're like, oh, is that a bite? And then it really makes it hard to differentiate the sand ridges from the actual bites. This helps eliminate a lot of those little ridges, so when you do feel those little more subtle bites or smaller fish pecking at it, you have a better shot at maybe dropping back and letting them eat it for a second before you have a knee-jerk reaction to all those bumps.
Yeah, and with the Carolina rig, when it comes to technique, it's actually really easy. The biggest thing that I found as a beginner a few years ago when I was just starting out is you want to keep your line tight. And in the surf, the water is dynamic. It's always moving, and depending on the day, some days are rougher than others. You really want to watch your line, and you don't want to see that line bowed out or getting pushed by the current. You want to keep it tight. But other than that, you can pretty much dead stick it even. As long as your line is tight, or maybe a slight little bit of give to allow the fish to bite and run a little bit is how I like to do it. But generally you can keep it still. You can do a slow retrieve, or you can do a slow retrieve and you can bounce it off the bottom. Just bounce, and what you're doing is whatever grub you have on there, sand crab, it's gonna jump up with that with the rod tip. It's gonna flutter down on the ground, just something that the fish can see. Yep. But I'm gonna make a whole separate video on Carolina rig technique, so be sure to check that out when that's available on the channel. But we just wanted to show you that that should be something that you're ready to fish if you're surf fishing in Southern California. If you're just starting out, and chances are if you're watching this video, maybe you are just wanting to start out as we're heading right into summertime. Yep. It's something that you should have prepared in your back pocket at all times. But with that said, let's jump into one more thing, and then I'm gonna give the floor over to Anthony. This is is kind of a little bit more of a niche thing, but I think it's super, super fun. And I found it to actually be very, very effective as well as micro jigs. And so I have these jigs from Submission Fishing and these 10 gram and 15 gram jigs. And I actually like throwing these on trout gear. So a 1,000 size reel, 10-pound braid and maybe like a 6-pound leader, fluorocarbon leader, or you could probably even get away with straight braid, but just throw one of these micro jigs on there and it's as easy as just casting it out, letting it fall to the bottom, and then just jerking it up and letting it flutter down, reeling in the slack line, jerking and letting it flutter down in the surf. You don't need to cast too far, especially when the fish are in close. You'll catch yellowfin croaker, you'll catch corbina, you'll catch surf perch, everything.
Everything.
Right? Yeah. Jigging has actually become super, super popular in the sport boat game with the knife jigs and all that stuff. Same exact thing. It's taken off for spotted bay bass in the bays. It's actually the exact same thing in the surf, and it can be extremely effective. And for me, it's so fun.
Yeah.
So just an option that I wanted to throw in there. But also, there's a lot of you guys that are watching that might be talking about, well, I really want to catch my first halibut. Just has the attention of people in Southern California for whatever reason. It's just a cool fish to want to catch and to catch. And so if you want to catch your very first halibut, Anthony, can you introduce us to some techniques?
Absolutely. One of my other favorite techniques is the drop shot. Any fluke, Jake over here has a pretty extensive selection. It was kind of tough picking which ones off the options he has. He has a lot of options, covers a wide range of price points. The natural baitfish color, you could get the natural baitfish color or the white. They're probably two of my favorite colors from Zoom. You get that nice white belly, a little bit of flake so that sun will reflect off, make it really visible. It's got that darker top. Very natural looking bait fish out there, especially with the grunion runs we're having. These grunion, a lot of them die in that surf, so these fish are going around getting weak, beat up grunions. So drop shotting something like that in the surf is really, really effective. That dying bait fish presentation with that cloudy colored body is gonna work really well. Switching over to more your classic, you have an offering from Damiki. Again, something that's gonna have a ton of action in the surf, a really durable body, something in that white color is going to really stand out. So whether it's pearl, white, or a bait fish, anything that has a white undertone is really going to be visible, even in the dirtier water surf opportunities.
Can you talk a little bit more about specifically, both of you, talk about the techniques for the drop shot in terms of just someone's never done it before? I've made videos on how to tie the drop shot rig. I'll put that in the video description too. But for someone that just wants to learn how to fish the drop shot, I'm actually would love to learn because I've never talked to you about it.
Yep.
And I'm looking forward to picking up some new things.
Yeah, so I came from the freshwater bass side of it more than anything too, and a drop shot is a rig that absolutely works in any lake, any time of year, and it's a really, really good crossover for the surf as well. You just got to figure out how they want it. Sometimes you got to be shaking it fast. Sometimes you just want it to sit there. Are they chasing bait? Are they kind of lethargic looking for it? So that's the nice thing about the drop shot rig too, is there's really not a wrong way to fish it as long as you are on the bottom, as long as you have bottom contact. But some days they want you to shake it really hard. Some days they want you to reel it in real slow. That's the thing, you kind of got to figure out the retrieve that they want that day, but it is just so forgiving because as long as you're on the bottom, you're doing it right.
So I guess what I'm hearing is various retrieval techniques from twitch to a lot of twitches to slow and even slower, that it just depends on what the fish might want that day. Okay.
One of the beautiful things with the drop shot is it's very forgiving in how you rig it because we're going to be casting out. And you don't have to worry, oh, I'm an inch too high, I'm not going to get bit. We're casting out, so your weight's going to be out here, and your bait's actually going to come down lower than where it is when it's standing up tall. Because we're not sitting right above it. We're going to be casting out and bringing it back to us. So it'll always be coming, the weight will be behind it, the bait will be sitting up here. You can see on these baits, I mean, I'm barely moving. These things have a ton of action out of it. If you're overworking it and you're doing this, you're making the bait do something that's not natural. So a lot of times just getting that bait, just a little subtle twitch with your rod is going to get really good action out of it. So we want this bait sitting there and just looking like a dying bait fish struggling. And that's something that triggers, I feel, one of the things I've learned about halibut, they're not the most active of fish 90% of the time. There's times where they are active, but most of the time they're not the most active fish in the world. And when you have a bait fish that's dying up above them, sometimes all you're doing is making them angry enough or confident enough that they're not going to have to work hard to get that meal, and they shoot off the bottom, grab it, and shoot right back down. They don't swim mid-water column most of the time. They're typically hanging out on the bottom, camouflaged in the sand. So spending some quality time with this above their head, just shake, 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 will elicit that bite when maybe you wouldn't have gotten it if you were quickly retrieving, a reaction bait over their heads. The way I like to fish it, just cast it out, shake it, vary my shake retrieval, just like Jake said. And I like to sweep the rod. I like to sweep the rod and then kind of wind the slack in. And when I do that, I'll sweep the rod and then I'll wind the slack in. And when I do that, it pauses the bait and lets it kind of like flutter down like a grunion that maybe got beat up in the surf, maybe a smelt that got tagged by something else and it's just out there, he's struggling, he's not strong enough and he's fluttering down to the bottom. So that little pause when I dip that rod back down, a lot of times I wind that slack in and I lift back up to start shaking again and it's just bit. You'll just feel that solid thump. And I noticed that pause is a real good time to get bit. And also on the shake, sometimes you'll get those quick reaction shakes or bites, but I've noticed a lot of times on those, sometimes they just have the tail. So it's okay to just kind of like ease into it or try to let them, sometimes I'll even kill it and wait for that line to start pulling against me. Because a lot of times with halibut, they'll bite something and then hold it. They'll never even have that hook. They'll just hold on to it with a little death grip. And then they'll do that second chomp and start swimming away with it. And that's when you get that bite. So I really feel confident when I pause that bait and let it flutter down and I'm bit, I know he's got that hook. I can set the hook and wind into him. So I've got a weight on there. It's gonna sit in the water like that. Your bait coming back towards you. So you see it's not as, like right there, I'm about a foot off the bottom. When it's coming back in towards the shore, I'm maybe 6 inches off the bottom. Now as we're shaking, we have a very natural struggling bait fish that we're dragging across the bottom slowly. So we get to cover a lot of water, nice and slow, and really try to make one of those halibut angry as we're bringing it in. And you could see, if you could focus on my hand a little bit there, you don't have to do a lot of movement with the rod tip to get that bait to really jump around. There'll be a little bit more friction in the water, so it's not gonna go as crazy, but you could see there's quite a bit of motion with very little out of my hand. So you don't have to like crazy jerk the rod. The trick to the drop shot, and I think Jake will agree with me, is you want that bait to move without lifting the weight. So that's key, is figuring the sweet spot to make the bait dance where you feel the vibration without lifting the weight. You want that weight to touch the bottom at all times.
All right, thank you guys so much for sharing your expertise on the drop shot. I actually learned quite a bit in that segment. So definitely an important option for you to have in your arsenal, especially if you're trying to catch your first halibut, and it's gonna catch your other species of fish too. And then also, Anthony mentioned the Lucky Craft, and so you guys know that it's what I love to throw. It's the Flash Minnow 110. When it comes to color selection, I always say bait fish on top and then pink on the bottom. I don't know what it is. Halibut seem to love the pink bottom, and then anything with a baitfish pattern, you're gonna be good to go. Don't overthink colors too much. When it comes to the Flash Minnow, it's really about the presentation and the action that you're giving it. And so it's one of the things that I always talk about with throwing the Lucky Craft in the surf. It's really working on your technique and working on your cadence. Generally speaking, the slower you can retrieve, the better results you're gonna have. I always tell people, and I actually heard you say this in a different context for a different application, but I always tell people, if you think you're going slow, try going slower.
Yep.
Obviously, you don't want this thing to be submarining, but just slow enough to provide that action seems to work the best. And for me, it took me like a full year before I started consistently getting bit. It just took that long, and it drove me crazy because I saw so many people catching on the jerkbait. And so what I've realized is work on your craft. Don't worry about the color. Don't worry about why aren't the fish biting. Worry about what you can do, and work on making every cast great. And if you can work on making every cast great, you will get bit. Not just with this, but with any style of fishing, I think. Yeah, just focus on what you can control is the biggest thing. But when it comes to jerkbait fishing from the surf, and this will catch, it'll catch everything. In general, you're gonna catch bigger fish, in general. And so I think all of my personal bests have come on the Lucky Craft. Do you guys have anything to add when it comes to jerkbait fishing?
Biggest thing with these things, it's mostly a straight wind. Don't be afraid if you have a bigger swell that's going back out, even pause. I think that was one of the things I talked to Benji about when he came in frustrated after fishing it for about a month was,
I remember.
How are you fishing it? And he's like, I'm winding. But a big thing is like Benji said, slow enough where you're not outwinding the fish. They do have to key in. In the surf, there's a lot of noise going on. It's like you being at a concert and then trying to pick out somebody's voice. All that noise static from being in the surf, the water's moving, rubbing up against the sand, they're down there in there, and they're picking up on those vibrations, but sometimes it's too late. So slowing it down, giving them a chance to hone in on it, And then if you are fishing close to the surf like I like to fish that incoming tide, so I tend to get a little bit more aggressive swell. What I'll do is when that swell's going back out, sometimes I'll pause it and even drop my rod tip a little bit so I can feel that bait fish swimming, but they're losing ground. And what that is a bait fish that's struggling against the current and he's losing, and that becomes really easy prey for a halibut that's looking to be opportunistic. So I like that cold water coming in, kind of activating them with that incoming tide. They're starting to wake up, move around, look around, and then they see a bait fish that's losing ground, and a lot of times they jump on that. And then when the swells are coming in, you know, you're gonna pick up. So even on a cast, it's not all about just one steady retrieve, it's about mixing it up through the sets of swell that's happening.
Yeah. Most importantly, like don't fish this and then try fishing like a 20-foot water column. This is a 1 to 2 foot suspending lure. So Lucky Craft actually makes a deep diver. They make the 115, which is like I think 4 to 6 foot diver.
Jake has all those in stock as well. I saw he has a pretty good offering on there.
115s, 110 or 100 DDs, deep bill. We got a lot of different offerings from Lucky Craft. We get you squared away.
Yeah, you could definitely cover the water column with his selection here. So
Right, so that's the most important thing is wherever you're fishing, if you watch any of my videos, I'm always using the 110, but I'm also always fishing negative tides.
Yeah.
I'm fishing reefs, and I'm hard structure, and I'm fishing about 3 feet of water. So it's very specific about when I'm fishing and where I'm fishing with this lure. You just want to adapt to whatever water column you're fishing. If you're fishing deeper water, you want to get deeper. Halibut, while every once in a while they'll come out and breach, most of the time they're just lazy creatures waiting on the bottom for something to come by. So we can probably talk all night about all these different things that we can do, but I think we pretty much covered the basics, which is what we wanted to do. So once again, thank you so much for allowing us to do this. I hope you found this helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. And until the next one, tie lines.